Good morning. My name is Mark Levine. I'm the Deputy Director of the New York State Association of Counties. It's my pleasure to be introducing today's webinar. On behalf of our President, Jack Marin, and our Executive Director, Stephen Aquario, I want to thank you for joining us on to this morning's webinar on electric vehicle charging stations and the role that counties can play and the role that many counties are already playing in building out a green infrastructure. NISAC a few years ago started a climate resiliency task force. And as part of that task force, we are rolling out a number of programs. We have a solar program, a hydroelectric power program, and this morning we are pleased to introduce an EV charging station program with the largest EV charging station company in North America, ChargePoint. For the past several years, we have been working in partnership with the state of New York and NYSERDA to help meet newly established renewable energy goals and working with our counties to become climate smart and green communities. There are some financial resources that the state has as part of the Volkswagen emission settlement, and we're working with the state and with counties to take advantage of some of those resources as counties embrace the new green infrastructure programs that are available. This morning's webinar, Investing in Today's Green Infrastructure to Power Tomorrow's Future. Counties across the state have been helping to build out an infrastructure of charging stations that will support the increasing number of electric cars on the road. This morning, we have ChargePoint, an electric vehicle charging company that has been working with many counties on developing this infrastructure. Whether your county is just starting or wants to grow the number of electric vehicle charging stations in your communities, ChargePoint is the only EV charging companies with approving solutions and expertise that you need to pilot, optimize, and scale your charging assets. This morning, all attendees are on listen-only mode or on mute. If you have questions at any point during the presentation, you can submit those questions in the chat area or question area of your webinar panel on the right side of your screen. After our panelist has completed his presentation, we will take up all questions. Again, thank you for taking the time to be with us this morning. And at this time, it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker. We welcome Ryan Backley, the sales manager for ChargePoint, who will be presenting this morning on the power of green energy and the benefits and options available to your county as you grow your fleet of green vehicles and as you provide charging stations for the many residents, the increasing number of residents in your counties and communities who have electric vehicles. ChargePoint was founded in 2007 by a group of entrepreneurs who anticipated the EV revolution. With extensive experience in technology and design from leading global companies, the ChargePoint's team is building the smart network that keeps the EV industry moving forward. Ryan, it's my pleasure. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Great. Thank you, Mark. Appreciate that. And hello, everyone. Yeah, so as Mark stated, my name is Ryan Backley. I'm a sales director with ChargePoint, and I've been managing the New York market as well as the tri-state area from a ChargePoint perspective for a little over 5 years now. And I've had the pleasure of working with several counties along that time, as well as hundreds of municipalities and a lot of other government agencies. So certainly appreciate this opportunity to do this presentation, but also potentially work on some upcoming projects with you guys. So today, what I'm looking to cover, we'll do an overview of the current state of the market, just the EV industry in general, but also what's happening specifically in New York. This is certainly an exciting and perfect time to be, start some evaluations of looking into this to see if this makes sense for your county and community. Planning considerations. So as you start to develop an EV charging program, things to consider, some best practices, as well as some high-level EV charging solutions, and then overview, and then any questions you may have, at the end. Look forward to that as well. Next slide, please. And Mark touched on some of this, but high level, ChargePoint, we were founded in 2007, which was a few years before the mass market of EVs really kind of hit, which was around 2010 or so, and have grown to have over 130,000 charging stations deployed, which is about 75-80% of overall market or so. Fluctuates a bit, but we're headquartered out in Campbell, California. I am based here on the East Coast. But our company is headquartered in California, and we've grown to, probably around 800 or so employees at this point, with almost half of them being, engineering staff. And a unique thing about ChargePoint is, we kind of design and develop everything in-house. So not only are we manufacturing the hardware and equipment, but we also develop and design, the software and network capabilities. So everything's, vertically integrated and designed to work together. And then we're also able to support them on an ongoing basis as well from a maintenance perspective. Next slide, please. So, here's a high level on some of the projections that are coming out. 2040 is a big target, and when you look at some of the state goals, like specifically here in New York with Governor Cuomo, carbon neutral by 2040, but you're starting to see this 2040 number pop up a lot around the country. As the market continues to grow. Big part of this too is the commitment by the auto manufacturers. And a lot of them that, like by 2025 is a big target for many of them, where they have public announcements that, all their cars are going to have some form of a plug-in option. And that'll be a combination of plug-in hybrid vehicles, which get, some form of a range, 25 to 60 miles or so. And they didn't charge within, that time, then they would just switch over to a hybrid motor. But then you're also your 100% pure battery electric vehicles. But the commitment of the auto manufacturers and the market adoption, is really gonna increase in that 2025. Good chance there'll be 25% of the cars in your parking lot will be electric vehicles, which is really exciting. A big part of this too, from a county perspective or government perspective, and even other applications, but the conversion of fleet vehicles over to electric is a big part of this. So in addition to the light duty vehicles that you've been seeing, growing over the past couple of years, those medium and heavy duty vehicles that are sometimes essential for fleet applications are starting to hit the market as well. So that'll be a big game changer. Next slide, please. So, the shift, there's certainly a shift in the approach here from what we're used to. So when you look at, the gas station model, we're used to, driving, let your tank run down to almost empty, you go to a gas station, fill up in 5 minutes and move on. The electric vehicle space, the mindset of an EV driver is much different. It's more of a top-off model, similar to how you might use your cell phone, as you're going out and about or in your office or home or whatever the case may be. You're kind of charging up throughout the day. Very similar from a driver's perspective. Most charging happens at home. So you leave your house with a full charge, you drive to work, good chance your workplace has a charging station now, or if you're going downtown to the shopping center or whatever the case may be, there's a station there. You might charge up for that hour while you're eating or shopping or whatever, but you're kind of topping off as you go around, and then you end your day. So that mindset is shifting to this electric top-off model. And from a county perspective, you can help in a lot of these areas because, you are a workplace. So there's county employees that could charge up there. There's community charging, putting these around so the public can use them at various locations where it makes sense. So you can really help drive this ecosystem of EV drivers. So from a county's perspective, you can play a very nice role in this effort. Next slide, please. So, here's a state snapshot from an electric vehicle standpoint. There's a little over, almost 50,000 EVs currently in the state. If I remember correctly, when I started, 5 years ago, there was probably around like 16,000 or so. So seeing some nice growth there. 45% year over year. There's almost 6,000 commercial ports around the state, and ChargePoint's about, 4,600 or so of those at this point. within the state, and that's across various applications, whether it's government, private, for workplace charging, fleet, etc. And from a state perspective, there's just a lot of really good incentives to help support these initiatives that are going on. So some things that you are eligible for through NYSERDA, which is called the Charge Ready New York program. This is for level 2 charging, and for those that just to give a quick update on that, is that there's different levels of charging. Level 2 is your most common commercial application. They can put up to 25 miles of range in an hour of charging, and that's whether it's ChargePoint or another provider. So if you're seeing stations out in the public, likely it's a level 2 charger. The next step up from that would be what's called a DC fast charging station, which is a much different animal. Certainly has its place in this market, a lot of times for fleet, and that's where you need to charge up or be plugged in for 15-20 minutes. So like fleet applications, service stations, rest stops, more of that gas station type model where you need to top off real quick and move on. From an incentive standpoint, this Charge Ready New York program is specific to level 2 charging, and it's a rebate where they'll give you $4,000 per charging plug to help offset some of the costs associated with deploying an EV charging station. And there's also some rebates for vehicles as well, if that's something you wanted to take a look at, which helps employees and potentially on the fleet side. There is a new program that just launched relatively recently, maybe a week or two ago, on the DC side, but it's structured a bit different, where they're looking for multiple locations throughout different regions around New York. And happy to address some of those questions that might come up on that later in the maybe during the Q&A. Next slide, please. What's also really exciting is that there's this is relatively new program that launched in say mid-July or so. The Public Service Commission, as you likely know, who governs the majority of utilities throughout the state, has announced an order for their utilities to put together a Make Ready program, which is live now. Mid or end of October, the utilities, had all their landing pages and everything set up. So applications across the state can apply for this Make Ready program. And just to address what is a Make Ready from a utilities perspective, the Make Ready essentially is the part of the installation from the service up to the point of where the station would be installed. So the conduit, trenching, running the wire, all that stuff. Does not include pouring a concrete pad or mounting of the station, but the majority of the installation component is what's considered the Make Ready. And what's nice is that you are allowed to stack this Make Ready program with the NYSERDA Charge Ready New York program. So you have the utility programs to help offset the some of the installation costs, and then you have NYSERDA to help offset some of the other remaining costs. And there's different buckets of funding. It's 50%, 90%, or 100%. 50% is really held for private lots, workplaces looking to just have it for their employees, or residences just for their residents. In the public sector, likely, depending on the application, don't want to overcommit to anything, but likely would fall into the 90% bucket of funding. And then there is an opportunity for up to 100% if you fall within a mile or so of a low to moderate income community. And not to get into all the weeds of the program, if you have questions, feel free to reach out to me offline, and we can assess to see how you maximize your opportunity here. All right, next slide, please. Some other things I wanted to point out, what's available to you in the state is there is a New York State contract, which we are a part of, specific to EV charging stations. And we are able to provide turnkey services through that, meaning not just charging hardware or associated networking services and all that, but also installation services through that contract. We have a network of partners that we work with throughout the state that can provide these installation services, so we can provide turnkey offerings through our New York State contract. And I highlighted Sourcewell on there. Many of you might be familiar with Sourcewell, which is a large national purchasing co-op, which is actually the contract. And we have a Sourcewell contract, but that's actually the contract that the state of New York adopted. So being that you're based in New York, you can just leverage the OGS contract. but just wanted to give some background on Sourcewell, because many of you folks might be buying things on, other things off of a Sourcewell contract. So I just wanted to let you know the connection there. So, it's a great opportunity. In summary, you have state rebates through NYSERDA, there's utility make-ready programs, and there's state contracts that you can leverage to help put a project together. Next slide, please. So just want to touch on some best practices. So as you're looking to build an EV charging program, just things to consider as you're discussing this internally. First point is aligning the priorities and to build for the future, delivering a great user experience. And EV charging is a bit unique because a user, it's a couple things. A user could also be the station owner. So as a county owning and operating charging stations, you want to make sure the folks that are managing the program internally have a good experience, but then of course you also want to make sure that the drivers themselves have a great experience, and then ultimately selecting a partner that's able to scale with you. Next slide, please. So aligning priorities. So sounds pretty obvious, but engaging all stakeholders. So EV charging is unique because it is kind of typically cross-functional teams get involved. So obviously you have your state sustainability team that have an interest in this from a carbon reduction standpoint, greenhouse gas saving, sustainability initiatives, and all that, which is great. You have your facilities team, or maybe fleet managers as well. That might be the day-to-day operators of the charging station. So they have certain needs that they're going to need from a mission critical standpoint, especially on the fleet side, but also from a facility team as far as maintaining these, planning installations, all that. You have your HR team that gets involved. That's mainly if this is also going to be rolled out to employees at your buildings for them to use for their own vehicles. So from a kind of a workplace or employee perk initiative. And sometimes there's other teams that get involved as well that are key. So it's really getting an understanding of what's your application. Is it workplace? Is it public charging? Is it fleet? All of the above. And then pulling in the right folks, because they're all going to have certain things that they're going to want to see from an operations standpoint and employee experience, et cetera. So that kind of touches on point number 2 of identifying the goals. So, having clear understanding of the administrator's objectives and what kind of reporting and analytics you're going to need out of the station, whether it's greenhouse gas savings, utilization information, energy costs, revenue if this is public access charging and you're charging a fee to use the station, things of that nature. Just understanding what needs you have, and then making sure, and ChargePoint's capable of delivering all this. It's working with us to make sure that we customize the experience and tailor it to what you're looking to do from a software perspective, and make sure you have everything that you need. And then ultimately clarifying what the scope's going to be, and how that's going to get funded, whether there's internal budget set aside for this. You're in a fortunate scenario where there is all this incentives available to you right now. So it's a matter of what's your scope now in the short term, and then what's your plan over the years, if to build it out and scale over the next couple of years, and how are you going to fund that? In ChargePoint, we have a lot of experience, navigating these incentives and stacking programs like a NYSERDA and a make-ready program. So we have a lot of experience. So that's part of our role in this too, is to make sure you have a clear understanding of what's available to you, and then how do you maximize that opportunity and assist, we can assist with applications and all that. And from time to time, there's other programs that pop up, like the Department of Environmental Conservation had a grant, a few months or several months back, sometime in May, and they've had that in the past where there's funding available. Sometimes there's other grants or opportunities that pop up. So as these other opportunities outside of what we've discussed already, as new opportunities pop up, we will make sure that you're, work with NYSAC to make sure you're educated on everything that's available to you, over time. Next slide, please. Delivering a great user experience. So defining your users. So as I mentioned, what's unique about EV charging is that it does, kind of cover a lot of different areas. So your users could be employees, So, who's going to be using the stations? Is it going to be a workplace? Is it going to be other drivers, meaning public? That'll determine where you want to site these, whether it's parks or maybe county-owned parking garages, things of that nature. And then from a fleet perspective, and then understanding what the requirements are. For example, in an employee setting, you want to make sure you have features, set up so that, drivers are notified when their car is fully charged so that other drivers can use it. The more efficiently you manage a station, ultimately the less equipment you have to buy. So we have tools within our software to help manage that, where the drivers are notified when their car is fully charged. They can get on a wait list so that, it lets drivers know somebody's waiting for the station. When it becomes available, then they're notified that it's available for them, things of that nature. From a public standpoint, something I didn't highlight earlier is that we also have the largest driver network. So we're in just about every glove compartment when you buy an electric vehicle, part of the welcome kit. And drivers download our app, which is all free, and they use our mobile app to see where our available stations are. We're also integrated with a lot of navigation systems. So for your public-facing stations, it helps bring drivers there, make sure they know if it's available, if it's in use, what pricing looks like, things of that nature. So it's understanding those types of requirements or other messages or marketing you may want to have on the station we're able to do as well. So it's really kind of getting an understanding of that. And then ultimately, access, is it going to be, public or private? But, in a workplace scenario, it could be a mixed use application where used by employees during the day and maybe fleet operators at night. If you want it restricted to employees only, you can enable access controls so that somebody from the public is able to start a charging session. Or if it's a designated charge it like fleet depot, you can set up access controls so that nobody from the public or even employees can access that station. So these are just some thoughts and things to consider as, who's going to be using the station and, what are those requirements, and we can accommodate all of this stuff and work with you to develop the right program. And then ultimately setting clear expectations. That wait list that's referenced there, that's that feature of the kind of that reservation queuing scenario. But, when I say set expectations, it's really the rollout of this to whoever the user group is, if it's employees, fleet, all that, doing some form of a formal, rollout so that everyone's clear as to who can use the stations, what the rules and policies are. There's other press releases that can be done for public facing, but, just things to consider here. Next slide, please. And then selecting a partner that can scale with you. There's a lot of things to consider when you're building out a program. So putting in 2 or 4 ports is one thing, but a lot of these initiatives, all right, maybe I only need 6 plugs today at this particular site or whatever, but my goal is to convert our fleet over to electric. And I know in the not too far term I'm going to need 30 ports at this particular station. So the network and software components really allows you to scale in a cost-effective way. And a big part of that is on the energy management side. So whether it's, not to get into the weeds on the technical piece, but whether it's ChargePoint or another provider, level 2 chargers typically require, or always usually require a 40 amp circuit per plug. So just to give you a real example, there was a state agency I was working with, and this was a fleet application where if they were to just use their existing electrical infrastructure and install, plugs, the max to support this fleet, the max they would have been able to put in is 9 plugs based on their current infrastructure, but they needed 36. So they would have had to spend a lot of money upgrading their service and all that to be able to accommodate that. But leveraging our energy management capabilities, we're actually able to oversubscribe the panel 4-to-1, meaning that on that same infrastructure that they have it in place already today, we were able to put in the 36 ports without having to do anything from an upgrade or anything. That saves tens of thousands of dollars and things, so that's part of the value that we can bring, as well as evaluating a site. What's the application? What's the right energy management strategy to reduce your installation costs? But not only that, it's also making sure that, based on the time of day or the peak demand or whatever, again, there's a lot of nuances to it all, but we can manage energy just to reduce overall energy costs as well, not just saving costs on the electrical infrastructure. Driver support. We have a 24/7, 365 driver support team. So, especially if these are public facing stations at parks or wherever, public parking lots, wherever the case may be, if a driver has an issue or has a question on the station at 2 a.m., they always have somebody to call. It's not something that the county or somebody else has to be assigned to do. They're always going to be calling ChargePoint, and we're staffed 24/7, as I mentioned. So we're helping field that for you. And then ongoing station owner support as well. We have a full support team at your disposal to help, if there is service-related issues. We have maintenance programs that you can participate in where we're, monitoring and maintaining the station and have uptime guarantees and 24-hour monitoring and all that. But, we're a partner that can really help you throughout the entire process, from design and engineering, installation and deployment, and then ongoing driver support and owner support. And we also have the expertise on the incentives. We have our finger on the pulse of everything that's available today. Sometimes things that are going to be coming up, and then or once they do hit the market, we're usually one of the first to know, so we can make sure that you all are educated as to what's available for you, as time moves on. Because what we're talking about is just what's available today, but this is constantly evolving. So we'll just keep you in the loop as things, in case now is not the right time to be looking at this, but maybe next year is. We'll always keep you in the loop. Next slide, please. All right, so these are just some examples of some of the charging infrastructure. The one on the left is that level 2 charger that I had mentioned, and just as a reminder, those are capable of putting up to 25 miles of range in an hour of charging. So that range per hour of charging is really, it's really dictated by the car based on battery size and what it can pull and all that. But that's a level 2 charger. We do have single ports, and we have other stations that are really designed just for level 2 fleet charging, meaning only for fleet vehicles, lower price point and everything. But this is your most common commercial station you see out there. It's great for workplace. It's great for mixed use, meaning workplace during the day, fleet at night, also public facing charging, has a nice user interface. The station on the right is an example of one of the DC fast chargers that we offer, called the CPE 250. And these can put out, where the level 2 is 25 miles, the DC fast charger is more like, 250 miles in an hour of charging. And for those that don't know, 80% on a DC charger, 80% of that charge happens in the first 30 minutes. So these are stations where, if you're pretty low on a charge, you go in there, 20, 30 minutes, you're almost 80% there, or right around there. Again, limitations depending on the type of vehicle that's being plugged in, but just to give you a sense. And we have stations faster than this, some are on the market now, or you could pair some of these up to get a higher output. And we have some other stuff in the works as well from a higher capacity, but not all the cars can only charge at a rate. So we have stations in design or that will be rolled out once the cars are here that can accommodate that type of speed of charging. So when you're looking at your particular application, you have to decide, all right, what's the right charging equipment, and a couple of relatively easy things is this side is like, what is the dwell time, for workplace or public facing charging, where it's like a park. I'm trying to think from a county perspective, like a park, a public parking garage where you're going to be there for a longer period of time. Level 2 charging, still makes sense. But if it's an area where maybe you're along a corridor, where you think it might be people coming off, some of the throughways or highways, and might want to stop in for a quick charge. If you have a garage or something you have access to or control, that would make sense from a corridor perspective, and we can help with that analysis. But or a fleet perspective, where you might have a vehicle that needs to turn around, turn a charge around relatively quick, or some of these medium or heavy duty vehicles that are coming out that just need a faster charge, like we're using this station for garbage trucks pilots and bus projects and other things, so if you need that faster charge in a short period of time, that's where DC makes sense. And ultimately who's using it. So, most of the time, these are the two that you're going to use, but I would say 80% or so is going to be the one on the left. The CT4000 is the model number, but that's your level 2 charger and can charge 2 vehicles at the same time. And I can address some questions if you have it at the end. Next slide, please. So, I touched on a lot of this, throughout, but from a charging software, and services, these are the things to consider, that the ChargePoint's able to provide to all of you. You have your dashboard and analytics. So with the software component, there's a a web portal platform, all cloud-based. All of our stations connect to the cloud via cell signal, so we don't have to tap into any local networks or anything, which is great, and also keeps installation simpler. But you'll have access to a dashboard and reporting to view things like utilization, how many different drivers are using it, how long are they plugged in versus charge time, revenue, energy costs, all that kind of stuff. You're going to have access to a dashboard, which is really important. And a lot of these programs like TrueNiceCert and everything, they have a network requirement because they're going to want some level of access to some of the utilization data and things like that. So, the network piece is key. Besides just incentives, but also just delivering the right experience and giving you the data you need to manage a charging station appropriately. Waitlist is that feature for just ensuring that good utilization and efficiency. A good rule of thumb is that leveraging waitlist and some other features we have, a dual port station in a workplace environment should be able to accommodate 4 to 6 drivers a day, depending on a couple variables. Energy management, which I already touched on, but this really ensures the efficiency of the current use of power, but also can help reduce energy costs, especially demand charges as you get into DC fast charging and some other added energy costs that are associated with either high scale of stations or just DC. So energy management is key. You are able to, and from a county perspective, it's typically, there's, unless it's a fleet scenario, there typically is a fee, associated with a station that you set. Will certainly give guidance and best practices based on the market and where you're located, but you can set pricing at the station, and there's a lot of flexibility on how you do it, whether it's for energy, meaning something per kilowatt hour, or time-based, could be a combination of the two. It really depends on what the application is, who's going to be using it, and where the station's located to determine what the right pricing policy is. But long story short is that there is a lot of flexibility on how we configure and set that up for you. And then access controls, which I touched on earlier. Who's going to be using it? Do you need to restrict access for whatever reason? Setting all that up, and however you set it up, day one can be changed at any point in real time, through the network, and we're there to support you in that too. But as you start to become more familiar with the network and software and how to make these changes, it's super easy to self-serve on a lot of this stuff. But just know you have me and a support team behind me to help with that. We have a team focused on fleet. Fleet is its own animal. There's a lot of other things to consider when you're talking about fleet applications. It's not just what type of charger do I need, but it's also other integrations that fleet operators are going to care about, like with their current telematics systems or asset management systems, fueling cards, like WEX and some of those out there, because there's scenarios where you might need to charge up, but you're not at one of your facilities and have to use a station that you don't own. So how do you manage that transaction? And that's where the fuel cards comes in, or if there's anybody that takes a fleet vehicle home and they have to charge at home, how do you manage that? Because it's hitting their house meter. So we have ways to manage that. So we have a team, designated to developing and managing, the fleet side of this. And I personally have a lot of experience managing fleet clients, some of our largest fleet clients here, like New York City, Con Ed, Port Authority, and others, on their fleet initiatives. So we have a lot of experience there. Driver services, which I touched on earlier, but it's basically what creates that great driver experience. Notifications when your car is fully charged, what the price is at the station, send a monthly report to them of all their transactions. So it's really about transparency, setting the right expectations early, and just and then having the services and features to just ensure that great driver experience. And then APIs is really how we do a lot of these other integrations that are outside of the box, like integrations with existing systems you may have internally, or if we have to customize something, we have a team that focuses on that as well. Next slide, please. And here's just some examples of some actual deployments. This is actually the city of Schenectady. You can actually see this is charging up a scooter as well as a BMW i3. Just wanted to show you a couple examples of some actual installations. You can go on to the next one, please. This is a very common and a typical, installation from a commercial standpoint or public facing workplace, whatever the case may be. As you can see, installed between 2 parking spots. We do have single ports, as I mentioned, but it's more cost efficient to buy a dual port station. not only does it save you on hardware costs, but it also saves you on installation costs, because essentially a single port is the same structure. So it's only, one pad you have to pour. It really reduces your installation costs. But sometimes in a fleet scenario it might make sense. But if you can do dual ports, that would be my recommendation, just to save costs. So like for NYSERDA funding, for example, this station would be eligible for $8,000 in rebates, which would more than cover the hardware costs. It's also good best practice to, have some kind of painting in the the stenciling is nice, or sometimes people do green curbs and things of that nature. It's not shown in this picture, but having protective bollards installed in front of the stations is also a good idea. Less likely to get hit when it's between two spots, but stuff happens. So protective bollards is also a good best practice to ensure that your asset doesn't get hit or damaged. And also, especially with New York, you get snow and all that stuff. It just more visibility and protects the station. Next slide, please. Wanted to show this one just to give a different perspective from an installation standpoint, without knowing all of your parking lot setups. This is just a neat example of how it's installed in a center island, where one station is actually serving both sides of the island. So just wanted to show this to have a different perspective on the installation. And thank you. And then this, I believe this might be the final example. Just wanted to show, this is a station for New York City fleet. They have almost 100 of these deployed around the city supporting their fleet. This is a neat application, which is why I wanted to show it, because this station is totally off the grid. So that solar panel is feeding, I believe, a 30 kW battery, and then our station is running off that battery. So this particular application is totally off the grid. From a charging standpoint, we're technically a part of this overall, application. We have a partner that makes the solar and the battery component, and we're the charging piece of this. But this is a pretty neat, application. Just wanted to give a different perspective on some of the different types of applications out there, especially for larger rollouts. You're starting to see a lot more battery integration and solar and things like that. That helps mitigate demand charges and things of that nature. And in some scenarios, if you don't have power at a site, it could be less expensive than running power out there. So if you have any questions on this, we can please feel free to reach out. And I believe that's all I've had to cover today. So yeah, look forward to any questions that you guys may have, and then whatever I'm not able to cover today, we'll share my contact information, my cell number and email address. So feel free to reach out, anytime if I'm not able to cover it all today. But thanks so much. Appreciate the opportunity.
Ryan Backley, thank you very much. This is Mark Levine, again, the Deputy Director of the New York State Association of Counties. That was a tremendous amount of information that was just transferred during that presentation. We appreciate your time this morning. At this point, I would like to remind participants on this webinar that they can ask questions by going to your questions panel on the right or left side of your screen and typing in a question, and I will take those questions as they come up. I also want to let you know that this has been recorded, and we will post this recording on our website, www.nisac.org/webinars. So this will be available. We encourage you to share it with those in your county who might be interested in this information. We will also be providing the PowerPoint slides that Ryan used today to speak from. Ryan, I want to start with some of the information that you shared early in the presentation, and that was 44,000 EV cars in New York State. How many new EV cars are you anticipating, or does ChargePoint anticipate each and every year?
Yeah, so that's a good question. It's hard to have the exact crystal ball on that, but from what we're seeing from like a ChargePoint, as I mentioned earlier, just about every driver creates an account with ChargePoint when they buy an electric vehicle. We're seeing, this is kind of across the board, but looking at New York specifically, we're seeing our driver growth grow, close to, in some years, close to 60% year over year. And as I mentioned, that by 2025, there is a lot of the auto world has those commitments to convert, just about every car they have over to a plug-in type option. So, a 25%, or, right now it's, maybe 2%, 2%. I don't know that exact number, so don't quote me on that. But, having 25% of EVs on the road by 2025 is certainly realistic and doable. And they're expecting it to be over half by 2040, which that'll come quick.
So 2025, this is a good time for counties to plan on the growth there. Can you talk about how many counties that you're currently working with in New York?
In New York specifically, I believe it's around seven or eight or so counties, I believe.
Okay, so we've got several counties on the call today. Who do you interact with, or who calls ChargePoint from the county? Like which functionality or which position do you normally work with at the county level?
Good question. So it does vary a little bit. Sometimes it depends on where the initial interest comes up. So a lot of times, especially these days, it's like people that are focused on fleet initiatives, because fleet's becoming a big topic. So fleet operators and things, folks like that. A lot of the sustainability team members, so they might have varying titles, but folks that are focused on sustainability initiatives for the counties, that's probably the number one person that reaches out to us. Sometimes their title has energy in it, so like the energy and sustainability person. But it does vary, especially after that initial outreach. Once, get into what's really involved in charging, a lot of other stakeholders get involved, as I mentioned earlier.
Okay, I'm not sure if you have this data or not, but of the 44,000 plus cars that are growing every year, are there areas of the state that these cars are more concentrated? Like,
there are.
Are there counties in some regions that should be looking at this more than other counties at this point?
It's pretty interesting because there are pockets, not as much anymore, which is great. It just shows the sign of the market of how fast it's growing. But I know when I looked at, when you looked a few years ago, where you looked at the concentration of EVs, and then you pull up a map of where we have stations, it really aligned with that. Like Long Island was a big sector. Then you have Buffalo, Syracuse, Albany area, but it's really statewide at this point, or growing. And a lot of times now, especially with more and more drivers, where people are taking trips and driving, even areas that maybe there was less of a concentration, these EV drivers are driving through that area. So public facing charging, just so, so they could stop in along their trips, and corridor charging and all that is there's certainly a growing need. So, 3 or 4 years ago, it'd be a lot easier to say, hey, here's your 5 kind of key pockets in the state. But nowadays, it's really the entire state, has a need.
Okay, great. What is the ideal ratio of chargers to cars? Whether it's a fleet or the number of EV vehicles in a fleet or in the community?
So good question. So assuming you're leveraging the features that we have, so I'll start with not fleet, so like workplace, type charging. One dual port station, so one single structure with 2 plugs coming off of it, should be able to accommodate 4 to 6 EV drivers a day. And that's leveraging those waitlist features, pricing policies to kind of encourage folks to get off, and so other employees can do it. Public's a little bit different because it really depends on where it's going to determine what the right ratio is there. That might be more percentage based, like not saying you have to install 20% of EV charging at a parking garage day one, but planning for that, but maybe starting with 5%. There's many towns that are starting to put in ordinances where having that mandate, hey, if it's a new parking garage or parking structure, 20% of it has to be EV ready. So that 20%, even here on the East Coast, is becoming a good rule of thumb. Again, that's more for planning purposes. Like if you're building out a garage or something like that, just think about that. Like, hey, let's make sure we have enough infrastructure in place, maybe, and throw the conduit in so that, we can accommodate 20% of this EV ready by, in a few years from now. On the fleet side, it really depends on what that, the type of fleet vehicle and, what it's used for, how many miles a day, what's the need. If it's overnight charging, that one-to-one relationship works really good. And to be really cost efficient is like if you have an application where you're using it for employees during the day and then a fleet vehicle can plug into it overnight, that'll save you cost there because you don't have to buy separate, fleet stations for that if it makes sense for the operation. But typically if it's overnight charging, that one-to-one ratio, makes sense. And that's where energy management can really be leveraged because, depending on how many miles that vehicle travels in a day, it might not need to put 25 miles in an hour because it's going to be plugged in for 8 hours overnight or maybe even longer. So that's where that oversubscribing of a panel, leveraging our energy management could save you on the installation costs. If you happen to have a fleet that needs high turnover, they do a lot of miles a day, but then they need like a 24-hour operation, again, there's so many different fleet applications, that's where maybe DC could make sense if that car goes out, but then needs to come back, charge up in an hour, and then you go back out again. So that varies a little bit, but if you're looking at just the charging depot, where overnight charging is fine, which is very common, especially at the start, one-to-one is a good way to look at it.
Okay, great. Thank you, Ryan. Amanda Laval has shared a link that we will post on our website near the recording of this webinar, and it is a map of EV registrations by county, and that's a NYSERDA map. So we will provide a link to that map out. So thank you, Amanda, for sharing that link. So you presented a number of programs or ways that a county can purchase these charging stations using grants from NYSERDA and from the utility and going off of the state procurement or state contract. What is the cost of procuring the device itself, and how much of that cost can be deferred with some of those grants that are available?
Yeah, so good question. So yeah, costs are going to vary a little bit depending on the type of station that you want. But if we want to talk about, the common, level 2 station that I had showed, earlier, the fleet stations, will have a bit of a lower price point. But from a, let's say that CT4000 or a typical dual port level 2 charger, with services, because when you're looking at how these are priced, there's a hardware component, then there's a network component, and then there's optional maintenance if that's something you wanted. So costs can range say $7,000 to $10,000 per dual port. So that's 2 plugs, depending on scope of services. So a lot of folks do buy like 5-year bundles. And I don't want to get into all the weeds of that, but just for budgeting purposes, $7,000 to $10,000 for a dual port station is probably a good estimate. That's not factoring in the incentive. So keep in mind you have $8,000 coming from NYSERDA if you're approved for it. So that could cover the hardware component in some scenarios. If you went for a larger program, meaning maintenance and kind of everything for like say a 5-year kind of offering, then you probably have about $2,000 left out of pocket. And just to be clear though, that doesn't factor in costs related to installation. So installation is going to vary by site, of course. The longer the run, more trenching or more work involved. If there's upgrades or anything like that, installation is separate. But the good news is that there is make-ready programs out there that can offset that cost as well.
Okay, so for members who are on the call and you have additional questions, you have Ryan's contact information right there, and you can reach out to him anytime to discuss the costs for your specific county. So another question is, so if you're planning, the county is planning on putting one of these stations in their parking lot, and where would that be located? Do you have recommendations for what part of the parking lot these charging stations are located?
Yeah, my recommendation would be as close to the source of power as possible. So as close to the utility room or service panel. That's not always the most ideal location. Sometimes you're like, hey, I want it front and center. Or, again, it's going to vary about where it's going, but that's always my recommendation, just because it's just going to save you on installation related costs. So I would say as close to the utility room or service panel that makes sense.
Can you talk a little bit about charging for charging? The cost for the public for charging their vehicle?
Yeah. So there's a lot of flexibility on how you have it set up, but you can charge for energy. So, energy costs across the state vary a little bit, but I'm just to make up a number. If your cost is 15 cents per kilowatt hour, you can pass that on to the driver and charge them 15 cents per kilowatt hour. You can have a slight markup on that. Not that as a county you'd be trying to generate revenue, but just for added costs of operation, you can have a little bit of a markup on there. I mean, it's really up to you guys on how you do it, or you can just do a direct pass through on the energy cost. So you charge them for energy, X amount per kilowatt hour. What happens in that scenario is that as soon as their vehicle's done charging, the fees stop. So a good best practice is to have some bit of a grace period, because that driver does get a notification that their car is fully charged, but sometimes added encouragement so they move on from that spot is also good. So the car's done charging, fees stop, you give them a 30-minute grace period to move their vehicle, and if they don't, then maybe you implement an hourly based fee, like 50 cents an hour or $1 an hour or something like that for a period of time, just for added encouragement to have them move on if that's something you're looking to do. And you can even increase that over time. Again, it's going to depend on where you're putting it and how you want to manage the station, but it is very common to have that hourly rate be set for, say, a 5-hour period, and then maybe ratchet up again to really motivate folks to move on from the station. Some do choose just to have hourly based out of the gate, so which is common in parking garage scenarios, because a lot of times there's an hourly fee, like $2 an hour anyway. So keeping it consistent with the current operation, just charging $1 an hour for having the charging space, something like that you can do. But yeah, I'm happy to have conversations with folks to discuss what an application might look like, and what a good best practice would be. It does vary case by case.
In the county that I live in, I use the rail trail a lot, the county owned and operated and maintained rail trail. And at every parking location along the rail trail, there are charging stations. And I was just wondering, is there an area in most counties where they post these ChargePoint stations for public use?
Yeah, I mean, if they, county-owned garages that they have, that are open to the public, is certainly common. If there's parks, I think the county parks that they have control over the parking lots that would be open to the public. Parks are a very popular location as well. If there's any areas in like a downtown type location that they have control over, those are other common areas. So any public facing parking garages or parking lots that they operate would be good targets.
Great, and it looks like we have one more question back to the purchasing and the grant applications. Is there a team at ChargePoint that can help a county through the different applications for the grants that are available?
Yep, absolutely. Some of them, we can't submit on your behalf, but we can help guide through the process, make sure you have everything you need. And also keep in mind, we have a network of partners around the state that can also assist as well. Like if you're looking for a turnkey offering and need installation services and all that kind of stuff, we have partners we've been working with for many years that have navigated these programs before too. So in addition to ChargePoint directly, we have a lot of resources for you to leverage.
Okay, at this point, that's all the questions that we have in. I want to thank you again for your time this morning, Ryan. I want to thank all of our members who joined us this morning. Please have a great day. And again, thank you. And if you have any questions on this program, feel free to reach out to NISAC or Ryan directly. Thanks again, and have a wonderful, safe, and healthy day.